I work 40 hours a week. How much can I read? Hi friends and readers, another week, another reading vlog. Did I say vlog? Another reading vlog. I work 40 hours a week full-time on a hybrid schedule, and this week we're keeping it simple. I'm gonna bring you along with me on an average work week, mostly the after work or on my lunch break like today. Right now it's 12:30, I'm on my lunch break, to show you just how much I would read in a comfortable, hobby-filled reading week. And by that I mean during the workday, I'm not gonna be able to read much, but I can read before work, not so much. During my lunch break, sometimes, and definitely after work each day. As someone who likes to read as a hobby, but also as someone who's on a bookish journey with you and me and the screen, here we are. I will say on average, I read about 2 books a week in between filming for content, but also as a way to not pick up my phone every second of every day in my free time. So let's start out with Monday. It's 12:30. I haven't read a single page. We're gonna be picking up the first book of this week, and that is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers. We've made it to Tuesday and it's 12:23. I am on my lunch break. Usually on my lunch break, I usually take lunch from 12 to 1, but I have a little bit of flexibility. Today, I walked my foster dog, or the dog that we're fostering right now, before picking up the camera. I also jumped online when my coworkers and I figured out that Alani Witch's Brew is back. Almost fall, y'all. But what you've been here for is an update on my reading, and I've got notes for you. Yesterday, on Monday, I started reading the first book of the week, and that is Coco Mellers' Blue Sisters. And after my lunch break and reading a little bit last night before bed, I finished at page 82. So Monday's total is 82 pages. For this author, Coco Mellers, this is the first book I'm reading by them, and I'll read you a little bit about them based off the book. It says Coco Mellers grew up in London and New York, which fun, where they received their MFA in fiction from New York University. They are a New York Times best-selling author of Cleopatra and Frankenstein, which I have not read, so if I enjoy this book, maybe I'll go back and read that one. It says that her work has been translated into over 25 languages and is currently being adapted for television. She lives with her husband and son in New York. Let's talk a little bit about the book that we are reading though. That is Blue Sisters, which, by the way, I'm absolutely obsessed with this cover. I feel like nowadays I am gravitating to judging a book by its cover. Sorry, sue me. If you can infer by the title and the cover, this book is following 4 sisters. So far, 80 something pages into it, I've found myself going back to the cover often to try to match each of the pictures with the 4 sisters that I'm learning about. I don't often have an image inside my head with specifics and characteristics that the author describes, but when there's clearly a picture laid out for me, I do try. Also, according to the cover, this is a Read with Jenna book. I think that it's a book club similar to like Reese's Book Club. There might be there's another one. What's the other one? Oprah. There might be a few out there now, but this one specifically is Read with Jenna. I think Jenna is Jenna Bush. Is that crazy? And I did buy a copy of this book a few weeks back. My boyfriend took me to the local bookstore and he bought me some books, and this was a part of that haul, except for I think he bought me 2 and I bought myself 1, and this was the one I bought. It also falls under the literary fiction or contemporary fiction genre, which is more and more every day what I'd say is one of my favorite genres to read, if not the favorite. So I'm highly anticipating getting further into this book and seeing what it's all about. And it was published back in September of 2024, so it's been out for almost 2 years now. And with the way the publishing world is working right now, I wonder if that means this author is close to releasing another book. I'd have to research that and see what their cadence of publishing is gonna be like. Without getting too much into each of the 4 sisters, this book does follow sort of 4 sisters. Really, you think it's gonna follow 4 sisters, but unfortunately unfortunately, one of those sisters has passed away, and their name was Nikki. And that has left us with the other 3 blue sisters. We have Lucky, who is a model. We have Bonnie, who is a boxer. And we have Avery, who is a lawyer. And that is literally me just giving you their occupations. What happened is that they lost their sister, the 4th sister, Nikki, about a year ago in this timeline. And now they are having to come together to go to New York to try to stop her old apartment from being sold. 80-something pages in, I actually haven't reconvened with all 3 sisters back in New York. Right now, I'm just learning about each of the 3 sisters and a little bit about the 4th sister who passed away. Don't know how. There have been hints to how, but I still have a lot to figure out. I've been taking notes on all 3 of the sisters to try to figure out who they are beyond their occupations that I just told you, and the impact that this death has had on them, their family, and their loved ones. So we're gonna keep reading on Tuesday to see how many more pages we get into the way of this book, and I'll update you tomorrow to see where we're at and what we learn about these 3 sisters. Rise and shine. It's 6:02 a.m. on Wednesday, and I'm going in person for work today. So I'll pretty much be MIA until 6 p.m. tonight. That's because I got a good bit of a commute to work. But anyways, the reading update for Tuesday. I think that we are now exactly halfway or over halfway our book of the week, and that is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors. I read to page 179, so we're gonna count that for Tuesday. I read 97 pages. So 82 Monday, Tuesday 97. We went up a good bit. I will say that is pretty average, or maybe just below average. I'm usually finishing the second book of the week by Wednesday or Thursday, so we'll see how much we read today. Sometimes I listen to the audiobook on my way to work, but this seems like one of those ones where I might not want it first thing in the morning on a Wednesday on the way to work. Maybe I'll listen on the way home from work, but I definitely should be able to read on my lunch break. When I'm in person, I really like to take my lunch break for myself, and that often means getting some reading in to decompress for the morning. We are learning everything that we can learn about the 3 sisters who are still alive. I'm really hoping that we get to learn a little bit more about Nikki, our sister who has passed on, and I do know the reason why they have passed away at this point in the story. And there are so many things coming up. We've got grief, we've got life after death for siblings, life after death when you're a parent and your child dies before you do. We're talking about addiction, we're talking about trauma, and so far this book is very character driven, which I feel like you should expect when you read the summary of this and know that you're following these 3 sisters after they've lost a different sister. And so far the chapters are pretty long, so that might force you into reading a little bit more if you don't like putting a book down in the middle of a chapter. When I say long, I'm talking probably 20 to 30 pages each, and for me that's long. A lot of times chapters are under 10 pages when I'm reading. Maybe that's just the books I'm picking up, I don't know. So that honestly has pushed me to read a little bit more each night just so I can get to the end of a longer chapter. So we're gonna pick off on Wednesday at chapter 8, and that chapter is for Bonnie. That is the sister who boxes. Anyways, I've got 15 minutes and I need to walk a dog before I go to work, so I will talk to you tomorrow and update you on how much we end up reading today. Just walked doggy. It's 1:26. I'm taking a little bit of a later lunch today because I had some coworkers who were working in person and had some meetings going on, so I hung back and stayed on a little bit longer until I could be relieved for lunch. Now I have a final update for yesterday, which was Wednesday. Of course, the day that I do work in person, I read the least amount of pages so far in this work week, but I still got to read, so that's exciting. Reading anything really is an accomplishment. accomplishment. I like doing challenges like this not to, well, this isn't really a challenge because this is just however much I read this week, but I like being realistic to show what reading looks like for someone who has a background like I do, working full-time, a little bit of home, a little bit of in-person work. My hobby is reading, and I really do it to try to stay off my phone because it's so easy for me to be on my phone. I actually have read a little bit already today, but not much. So I finished yesterday on page 252, which brings our total for Wednesday to 73. I do try to listen to an audiobook on the way home because it's like an hour and 15, an hour and 30 for me with all the traffic. Like yesterday, I actually called up with a friend on the phone while driving home, so I didn't listen to an audiobook. So that was all reading last night after work. Sort of put me to bed last night after I read. I fell asleep so easy, which was nice. And now it's Thursday. I am working back at home today, but I've only read a few pages this morning before I started work at 8 o'clock. I'm on chapter 11, which is another chapter by Bonnie, and that's page 262, which means I have about, I think, 80 pages left, if I can remember how many pages were in this book. Less than 100 for sure, and I should certainly finish this book today. Maybe even start another book, not too sure. Yesterday while I was at work, I had this out on my desk from when I had gone to lunch, and there was someone in the office who I didn't really know well, but they came in, they saw this book on my desk and were like, oh, that's a cute book. What's it about? And then I said, it's actually kind of sad. It's about these 4 sisters. One of the sister dies, and this is life after that death. A lot of family dynamics, a lot of triggering topics. You know, I was just kind of candid about it, which this mostly stranger didn't need to hear. And he was like, that seems pretty sad, but you seem so happy. So if that explains that experience and my experience reading this, pretty much does. I mean, we are really diving into the sibling dynamics. We have the oldest sister, Avery, and with Avery, she has a past addiction. She works as a lawyer. She lives in London. She is separated by age and by occupation, and really being the oldest sister, we learn a lot how Avery feels like she has always had to save the family. When the sister died, when things happen, she's taken on that motherly figure because the parents are crappy parents. They are not involved in the story at all because they aren't good parents, not present parents. And Avery has all her life sort of assumed that role. You can imagine the pressure of the oldest sister in a scenario like this. And then a step down from Avery is Bonnie, who was a professional boxer, retired at some point to become a bouncer due to the traumatic death of her sister and her involvement in that. And Avery and Bonnie are a little bit closer in age, and with that comes a little bit of a closer relationship. Even then, Bonnie lives in LA and is the only sister in the United States. So that proximity to their old life in New York has been impactful to Bonnie. And then the third sister would have been Nikki. Nikki was a teacher. The biggest thing you learn about Nikki before she dies is that she struggled so strongly with endometriosis, and she was full of life and wanted to live life, but she had so much pain in this illness of endometriosis, and no one could help her numb that pain. And then finally you have the youngest sibling, Lucky. And imagine being a youngest sibling in this family dynamic where Lucky was the closest with Nikki due to being the closest in age and growing up in more similar age ranges, and then you lose that sister and probably feel so separated from your older siblings. Lucky lives in like Paris, so definitely living a luxury model drug-filled existence and is not finding happiness where she wants to find it, really. That's what I'll say about all of these sisters. I just want to give them all a big hug, and I'm really hoping that they can have some sort of happy ending by the end of this book, come together in a way that allows them to grieve their older sister, but also live the life that she would have wanted them to live. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the final updates for Thursday. Made it to Friday, so this will be the last day of my reading during a full-time work week because I work Monday through Friday. Here is my little kitty cat, Louie. Have you read any today? Let's talk about final calculations for Thursday. Oh, he's back. Hello. I ended up finishing Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors, and I did not start a new book last night. Yesterday, I read a tad on my lunch break, but I finished most of this book last night before I went to bed yet again. That's really the sweet spot for me and reading during the work week is before I go to bed. Especially since we've been fostering a dog, I feel like I've had a little less time in the week to read on my off break because I've been walking the dog that I'm not normally walking, as we are a cat household. Fingers crossed though, we think we found a good spot for him to land and he might get adopted tomorrow. All right, we read from 252, let me calculate, to 339. So 87 pages. That feels like a sweet spot this week, just under 100 pages each day. I will say on a normal week when we're not fostering a dog and when I'm filming reading vlogs, I am finishing a book usually by Wednesday, but in this case finished by Thursday with our first book. I would give this probably a 4-star. As someone who likes the fiction genre, who likes character-driven books, who has interesting family dynamics and interesting sibling dynamics, this falls right up my alley. I definitely see myself going back to maybe read the first book by this author and then keeping up with them if they have any new releases coming out in the next few months or years. And also would recommend it to someone who likes fiction. If you're in a good headspace to read about some trauma, addiction, grief, there's some other tropes in here that aren't easy to read. So keep that in mind if you pick this one up. Definitely try to find it in the right time. I will be putting this back on my shelf because it is such a beautiful cover. And now for Friday, I really haven't decided if I want to pick up a book on my Kindle or go ahead and pick up another book off my physical TBR. I really don't keep books on my physical TBR, but there is one left on there that I bought about a month ago now when I went to the airport and went on a cruise. I bought it in the airport and I'm thinking I might just pick that up today and get started with it. I do have to finish the rest of the day working until 5 o'clock and then have some errands to run with my boyfriend and get prepared to send our little foster dog off to his future home tomorrow morning. So I really might not read that much today, but nonetheless, I'll bring you with me and update you on our final day tomorrow on what today ended up looking like. It is now Saturday and we had a bit of a sad Saturday morning. Friday went exactly as I thought it would. We were just busy preparing things for our little foster guy to go to a new home this morning, and we did. They came and picked him up. I'll probably try to insert a little picture of him so you can see he was such a cute dog. Honestly, we loved having him for those 3 weeks, even though we weren't anticipating fostering a dog. It just sort of happened, but I think that he ended up in a great spot. And now that we're back to just having cats in our household, maybe have a little bit more time to read. But it was really nice. Honestly, it made me feel a little bit more present during the day, and I got to see a lot more sun and the outside than I normally do, which was nice. So to the final tally of the week and what I ended up reading, yesterday on Friday, I had the lowest amount of pages read, which makes sense. I only read a chapter before bed last night of a new book. I read to page 28. So that was a long first chapter, but 28 was our total for Friday. So let's do a little total of how many that would be throughout the entire Monday through Friday work week, which is a total of 367 pages. Now, in a regular week, that might have been one book that I read. So I definitely read a little bit slower this week, but you know, any pages read is an accomplishment. I think I've said this earlier in the video. I really wasn't trying to challenge myself this week. I was going with what life was throwing at me this week, and that was foster dog. And I also know that if I would have rushed myself probably to read 2 books this week like I normally do, I could have put myself into a book slump, and I really didn't want to do that. And I did read a chapter of The Shampoo Effect, but I'm gonna save my thoughts and anything about this book for my next reading vlog. I think next week I'm gonna try to read based off of how many minutes I spent on TikTok this week. Yikes. Watch next week's video if you want to know how I liked The Shampoo Effect once I get a little bit more into it. But if you enjoyed seeing how much I read during a work week, let me know. I can keep doing that. There are weeks where I work more in person, so I'd probably read less than I did this week, but it was a good week and a good balance of my hybrid schedule, which I'm so thankful for. Anywho, that's all. Bye for now.